basically what I'm going to try to do is give you some ideas to, where to get information and how to manipulate that information so that if you're facing a transit issue in your community, you have a fighting chance. Now, I'd like to tell you that, well, once you have the data, you have a killer argument. Well, you do, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win, because right now there's like a traveling troupe of transit lobby that goes from community to community, and they are taking advantage of local politicians and so forth who are naive but impressed by the idea that they can have the photo op opportunity to do a thing over a legacy or something along those lines. And the transit lobby has just been very successful in getting people to adopt wasteful programs. Okay. There are some basic aggregated data sources that are easily available if you just know where to go to get them. A basic one is the Public Transportation Fact Book. In fact, one of the things that I have made a practice of doing and fighting these things over the years, been mostly successful but recently not successful, has been to use their own data and to be very conservative in how I use their data so that people don't say, oh, well, you're just exaggerating or you're not doing the right calculation and so forth. So all of the information that I use are not estimates produced by myself. In fact, many times they say, well, these are just Semmens numbers. And I would say, well, no, I can show you exactly where they come from. They're not, I didn't make up the numbers. I got them right from the Public Transportation Association. That's a lobby group in favor of transit. Highway statistics. One of the things that the people advocating transit don't do is compare the transit system with the highway system. And I say, well, how can you make an intelligent judgment if you don't know, well, all right, what if I had chosen plan B instead of plan A? So I bring in that data as well. And then Randall has put together a lot of this good data on the American Green Coalition website, so you can get some of the calculations done for you at that location. Now, some of the basic data that you would need to take a look at, some of which you will need to make your own calculations, but ridership, the numbers are in the books. They have the number of trips, they have the number of passenger miles. They have the number of vehicle miles, they have the number of vehicle hours. They have costs, and they have revenues, they have crashes and fatalities, and they have crime, but they don't calculate them into things like per vehicle mile of travel or per person mile of travel. But the information that you need to make those calculations is in the sources. So you can do that to help make sense out of numbers which are just floating out there by the transit agencies. In the highway data, you have vehicle miles, you have costs and revenues, you have crashes and fatalities. Again, that are all there. You can make some of the calculations to help bring it into a comparable type basis. Now, you also will want to get city-by-city data, because these other sources, it's easy to get nationwide averages and so forth, but you want to get city-by-city because in your city, you say, well, ours is different, or our proposal is this. Now, each city that wants to get federal money has to do these types of things. They have to do an annual report on new starts, and they have to do environmental impact statements. They can be very revealing if you're willing to pore through these thick documents. Now, to give you an idea of how fat they are, this is an example of the annual report on the new starts. And they're supposed to put all kinds of financial ridership data and everything like that in that one. And this is one of 3 volumes of the environmental impact statement for the Phoenix study. There are valuable types of publications. To give you an illustration of the aggregate stuff, these are the highway statistics and transit fact book. They're also available on the internet now. And then the Federal Transit Administration does have transit profiles where they'll give city-by-city information on historical operation data that you could use if you wanted to pick out your own city if you already have the system, or another city that I feel is comparable, so you can compare them. The local data will be disaggregated. You can get traffic impact data and environmental impact data out of these reports that have to be done to get the federal money. Now, just to give you an illustration of some of the types of ways that I've used this data, this is the aggregate data for transit share of urban travel in America over the period from 1945 to most recently. And as you can see, at one time, transit had a big role, and 50% of the trips. More recently, we're down to the 2 to 3% level for urbanized areas. Now, this includes all the big, like New York, Chicago, etc., are all in there. The city of Phoenix, as an example, has a transit share that's less than 1%.
Excuse me.
Yes.
How is transit defined? So, for example, does it include taxi fleet, which is public transport?
No. This is just trains, buses, regularly scheduled stuff that's operated by the mass transit system. Does not include taxis.
That trips are miles.
These are person miles travel. Now, one of the things that has had a dramatic impact is in the 1964, the federal government decided to get involved to help boost public transportation because mostly the privately owned systems in many of the cities were financially in trouble. And so they said, well, we're going to help bail them out. And federal aid has served as an attractive carrot for a lot of cities who have said, well, we know the system really is kind of crappy, it's not very good and so forth, but we're going to get this federal money. And we want to bring this federal money into the community. Well, as you can see, yes, there's been some federal money that's come in, but the deficits experienced by the systems are much larger. And so cities that have grabbed that federal money have signed themselves up for necessary local increases of funding to cover the deficits once they get the federal money. Here is another potentially useful way of comparing the cost to move one person 1 mile by a transit option versus an automobile option. And as you can see, right around 1980 or so, the transit costs per person mile have exceeded the costs for automobiles. Now, in those costs, you've got everything. The automobile cost includes not only the cost of building the roads, but the cost of owning and operating automobiles. To make it comparable on the transit side, where you have the running the buses or the trains and building the tracks and so forth. Although it does kind of understate for bus transit because buses operating on the public sector don't really pay user taxes to use the highway. They're usually exempt under the clause that government shouldn't have to be taxed to use these facilities.
Does that include road costs?
Yes. I put this table together to kind of show comparisons for what are typically offered as the options for new types of starts and the cities that are considering them on building new subways like they have in New York City or Washington, D.C. are typically not under consideration because they are tremendously expensive, and so light rail has become kind of the choice because it looks cheap because you don't have to pay as much to do it. But if you actually compare the cost per person mile of travel, we see that, well, light rail is about twice as expensive as running the same service by a bus system. So especially since when they usually choose the light rail route, they usually look at their existing bus system, where are the buses most heavily used, and those bus routes are replaced then by the light rail. So I think it's very reasonable to take a look at that, and as we can see also, light rail is about 4 times as expensive as providing transportation by roads. Now, another argument that's often used is that, well, we need to stimulate employment and the economy by investment in public transit. Over the period from when the federal government first became involved, approximately $370 billion has been invested in public transportation in the nation. That currently supports about 1 million jobs that are directly related to the operation of those public transit systems and their support network. If that $370 billion had been invested in a business that broke even over this time frame, it would still have $370 billion of assets because it would have earned enough just to protect the investment. That would be sufficient to support 19 million jobs. And if the money had been invested in a business that could have earned a 5% rate of return on investment, which is not outrageous, I mean, that's a pretty moderate level of return, it would have provided enough capital would have been reserved to support 32 million jobs. Now, obviously, this is holding everything else constant except the number of jobs. If this had actually happened, we don't have 32 million unemployed people that we could put into the workforce, and so what we would have had is higher wages, higher salaries for people as a result of the ability of businesses to pay more because there was more money, because instead of being consumed by the losses of public transit, it would have been available for reinvestment. Another factor to do a calculation and take a look at is the safety issue. Those who tout public transportation say, riding in a bus or a train or whatever is much safer than driving in an automobile, and that's true so far as it goes. However, that doesn't mean that the transit system that's established is necessarily going to be safer. Now, in terms of fatalities per person mile, bus, as you can see, does pretty well. And heavy rail does pretty well compared to the automobile. They have lower rates than automobile does. But the light rail option has a higher fatality rate. And that's due in large part to the attempt to get away with light rail on the cheap by putting it into the streets. And so they are reintroducing an alien element which most drivers are unfamiliar with. And the transit people say, well, it's not the transit's fault because you can only be hit if you're on the tracks. And so it's the drivers and the pedestrians and the cyclists and everybody else who's getting hit by the train that are at fault. And my retort to them in terms of planning the system is, well, you have to deal with the reality of the way that it is. I mean, these are people who are traveling, making their trips, and there's going to be a certain amount of human error that's going to be involved in transportation. And you need to design your light rail system so that it's safe. Now, in the state of Arizona, in preparation for their light rail, the Arizona Department of Transportation requested legislative authority for safety oversight, and it was passed in 2002. The Arizona Department of Transportation did nothing until this year. They finally have appointed a staff, not an engineer, not a person who knows anything about safety or has anything in background in safety, but a guy who worked for the Department of Transportation as a planner and as an administrative assistant is now in charge of safety oversight for the light rail program in Phoenix. During this whole time period, they completely designed the system with no safety oversight. Recently, this person developed a brief description of what their safety plan is, and maybe you won't be surprised to hear it, but I imagine the general public will be surprised to hear it. Their safety plan is, if there are crashes, they will ask the rail authority to give them complete information about when and where and how the crash occurred. So the safety oversight is all reactive. They're going to wait until the first crash before they ask the first question, because they tell me it would be insulting to tell the rail people that we're concerned about safety. It would show a lack of confidence that they know what they're doing. I said, well, no, it's always good, to get some input as you're going along, whether it's safe or not. And there are some aspects of the system which are definitely not safe. It's creating dozens more railroad intersections than there were before. The rail, in many cases, weaves across the roadway, creating diagonals across a number of these streets in order to satisfy some of the Chamber of Commerce backers who want the train to be right next to their business, like the baseball stadium and so forth. So this shows that light rail is not a safe operation as currently designed. And in fact, just recently I proposed, since I worked for the Department of Transportation. In fact, I tell people I've been working behind enemy lines for almost 30 years. I suggested, well, you know, since you're already committed to doing this light rail system, what about, let's get some research, because there's dozens of other cities that have these things. Let's survey them and find out which ones have high crash rates, which ones have low crash rates, and did they do anything different? But that proposal itself was also turned down as, well, again, it's too sensitive. I mean, we would be insulting these people by attempting to get information to them. Well, you're assuming that they haven't already done that. I said, well, then let's ask them if they've already done that and get that information. But no, they haven't done that, I can assure you. Because I guess it's, you know, see no evil, hear no evil philosophy.
Does your fatality figures for the rail include people in cars that get hit by the trains, or is it just people on the train?
Okay, the fatality statistics here involve everyone who is either on board or hit by the vehicle. So the light rail fatalities include you're driving your car, you're hit by a train, you're killed, that's included. However, it doesn't include, which I think is an arguable point about which it should, the light rail train stations are all, in the Phoenix area, almost all designed to be in the middle of the street. You're a potential passenger. You see the train is ready to pull out of the station. Dart into the traffic to try to get to the train, you're hit by a car. That's counted as an urban auto fatality. And it's not linked at all to the light rail because you're hit by a car, not by the train. But you wouldn't have been hit by the car if you weren't trying to catch the train. So I think this statistic there probably understates the attractive nuisance idea. I mean, right now, you know, you could be sued if, you know, someone wanders into your backyard, drowns in your pool because you didn't have it fenced off. Well, okay, is light rail going to be sued because of, well, it's in the middle of, anyway, you know, there are design problems that should have been addressed, that haven't been addressed, and are going to come up later. In fact, I'm hoping for a future career as an expert witness for plaintiffs suing the light rail for failure to exert normal prudence in their design and operation.
Light rail and commuter rail fatalities, the overwhelming majority are not passengers.
Hardly any are passengers. It's the cars and pedestrians and cyclists that are impacted. Okay, crime, another thing. We had an excellent presentation earlier today on you know, designing neighborhoods to reduce crime. Well, designing transportation systems to reduce crime would also be a good idea. Here we look and we find, well, oh my gosh, light rail again has got a higher serious crime rate than any of these other options for moving people in an urbanized area. When I first had this statistic a number of years ago, I just had the total crime rate, and it was higher, and they said, oh, well, those are just people who are not paying fares. I mean, so that's not a serious crime. So I went back to the data and extracted only the ones that involve things that we say, well, murder, rape, robbery, assault, larceny, theft, burglary, art. Those are all things that are defined as serious crime by those who are in the business of law enforcement. And we find there that the rates for crime are high on light rail. And so, you know, we have to ask ourselves the question, well, is it good to put something into a neighborhood which is going to be a magnet for crime? And the reasons why, we can only speculate because no one's, you know, published any studies on this that I'm aware of. Why does light rail attract so much crime? Well, it's easy to make a getaway compared to you know, an underground type of system because you're riding a service and you go in any direction. A lot of light rail has park and ride lots, which you know, turn out to be like shopping centers for criminals. They know, oh, you're parked here, you're not going to be back here for 8 or 9 hours, and so they have free reign on the cars. Light rail also has known stops. You know, if you're on a bus and you know, your normal stop is on a particular corner and it looks suspicious or whatever, you could just not call for the stop and it goes by and you can get off later. But the light rail has to stop at the stations, so criminals know that, well, there's going to be an opportunity, all the doors are going to open, and they can get at the people inside. Pollution is another area where a lot of the advocacy of transit and light rail and so forth is, well, we need it as an environmental type of thing. I think most cities, if you have data that's available, will show a similar type of pattern. That, well, yes, back in the late 60s, before all these pollution controls on cars and so forth, the types, amounts of pollution are very high, whereas in recent years they're practically non-existent. And in fact, we did a study at the Arizona Department of Transportation projecting another 20 years into the future, and even though Phoenix is a rapidly growing area and expected to double in population over the next generation or so, the rates of pollution still continue to go down because of the projection of turnover of the fleet to cleaner and cleaner cars. And that was without assuming new technologies. You say, well, yeah, they're probably going to have, they might even have hydrogen fuel cars by that time. Who knows? Interestingly enough, in the report that was filed with the Federal Transit Administration, they were required to show the environmental impact, and actually it shows that when they build the light rail, that pollution is higher, projected to be higher in the year 2020 than if everything else is held the same and they don't build the light rail. And so they get by with a weaselly statement in the document that says, well, it's going to be higher, but not high enough to trigger sanctions from the government. So the thing that we've been told for years is a step toward cleaner air shows actually it doesn't do anything for cleaner air. In fact, it makes it slightly worse than it would be otherwise.
Why is that?
Because when you put the train in the street, it takes away street capacity. So previously you had these automobiles that are trying to go on a 4-lane, and now there's only 2 lanes of traffic, and very few of them decide to get on the train, and so the number they get on a train is small. The number that are still trying to get through the same street in a car isn't reduced by much, and so you have more idling, and so you have more pollution. We also were fortunate enough that a mole working within the Metropolitan Planning Association ran a model that was incorporated into this report, and none of the transit people understood it. But in any case, if you run the model, it showed a number of impacts on traffic and so forth. They didn't show miles per hour. I had to make that calculation. But when you do that, you find out, well, gee, things are going to slow down a lot over the next 20 years as projected, but the no-build option shows we would be slightly better off. That the speeds on the streets would be faster than if we build a light rail. Again, undermining the whole contention that, well, light rail is part of the solution to traffic congestion. This indicates, no, it's not part of the solution. It's not any part of the solution. In Phoenix, it actually makes things worse, and again, it's because the trains are in the street impeding traffic. And so this kind of, is like a summary sheet that I said, well, all right, you got efficiency, equity, effectiveness. These are things that most reasonable people would be concerned about in terms of, well, how do I evaluate whether a bus or light rail or auto or whatever is the best option. In terms of efficiency, you've got cost per rider mile. In the Phoenix area, these are the data that showed up for our area. Light rail, $2.90 per rider mile. For bus, $1.87, and for auto, 35 cents. Now the auto one, again, I was pretty generous in that I took their assumption that, well, we just have single occupant vehicle commuters over there. I said, well, that's not exactly true, but I'll assume that, so you get 35 cents even with that assumption. So I didn't want to quibble over whether it's 1.1 or 1.6 or whatever. In terms of equity, I want to say, well, okay, are people paying their way? And light rail, you see, well, riders are paying 5% of the cost. That means that somebody else has to pick up 95%. And the bus, they're paying about 15% now. These numbers may be different in other cities by some amount, but the order of magnitude is all going to be similar. I'm confident of that any light rail system is going to be down there in somewhere in the 5 to 10 to 12% range in terms of the share being paid by riders. Bus, it may range from 15% to maybe as high as 30%. And your road auto could differ, but in terms of all the taxes and so forth that are applied to autos in Arizona, many of which don't go to build highways, they offset some of the non-highway user taxes, and so you got about 100% of the cost of roads paid for by the users. And in terms of effectiveness, you want to know, well, how much of the travel is going to be handled by each of these options? And as you can see, the combined share in the Phoenix area, assuming they got the plan passed, which they did in November, that their own numbers projected this share that by the year 2020, public transportation in the Phoenix metropolitan area will be handling 1.1% of the travel, almost 99% still to use the roadway. So I think this kind of thing, well, why are we doing this? Yes? No. I'm almost done. See, summing up. So basically there's a lot of published data, and you can use it, you can manipulate it. In fact, if you want, you can always contact me and I can give you tips about how to interpret stuff. I mean, if you get some weird things from your local community, and I say, well, what's this? What are they saying? So forth. If you have copies of reports, you want to send them to me, and I'll be happy to take a look at them and try to analyze it for you. Some of the data are easy to get; others require more effort. Now, in the local area, a lot of time, the FTA, Federal Highway Administration, Transit Administration, they're going to publish stuff, and it's going to be on the website or available through libraries and so forth. Your local guys, they have to prepare these reports to submit to the federal government, but they may not publish them. However, they are public information, and so most states will have laws that say, well, hey, they've got to make these documents available to you if you request them. Now, what you should go away from this knowing is that, they have to do a report on NewsStart that shows some sort of financial data and performance statement. They have to do an environmental impact statement. So you can be pretty persistent, saying you want to see that. Say, oh, we don't have that. If they're on that list to get that full funding agreement from the feds, they have to do these kinds of documents. Basically, the data, every city's data that I've seen, all the aggregate data tell a story of public transit inefficiency, inequity, and ineffectiveness. I've been in the transportation business for almost 30 years. I've been working on public transit for more than 15 years. There are no winning systems. Wendell Cox has gone globally to look for things. He hasn't found any either. So I think we've searched pretty far and wide. There are none. I mean, I suppose it's possible in some podunk town there's a minibus running somewhere due to some charitable contribution of a generous person. Doesn't require tax subsidy, but anywhere else I'm not aware that there's anything working. But getting this story out to the media and voters is difficult, because we found in Phoenix that the media, they're all on board with this whole idea that, oh, this is a great thing, we want to do more of this, and a lot of them, the Chamber of Commerce behind this stuff, the advertisers from the newspapers and the television stations and so forth, all on board, and so the media just is not very open to some of this stuff, and it's hard, and so I think there's another session that's going to be tomorrow morning about how to deal with the media, and I'm anxious to get in on that and see if anybody has any ideas. So basically, that's that, and if there are any questions that I haven't answered yet, I don't know what they are.
John,
Yes.
a lot of times the rail backers would say, well, don't look at regional impact, or look at corridor impact, and using the wrong measures. How do you go about finding corridor specific?
Okay, yes, in fact, in this report, another part of the data was that they showed region-wide data and in the corridor data. And in the corridor data, it wasn't any better. For example, in the region, they projected that the light rail system would take one car and 2,500 off the road. In the corridor, it was one car and 700 off the road. In terms of the The corridor impact, I think one of the slides there showed in terms of vehicle speeds. In the corridor without the light rail, the speed in the year 2020 was 17.9 miles per hour. In the corridor with the light rail, 17.7. So that data is there in that particular report for Phoenix. In other places where they might not have that, usually every metropolitan area has to do some sort of traffic modeling and projections and traffic counts and those kinds of things. And typically they'll have it by street or arterial. And so you should be able to get that information out of them to say, well, okay, I want to know, what's the traffic on Wilshire Boulevard or whatever in Los Angeles, and you name the streets. The Metropolitan Planning Agency probably has that data in some shape or form, either as historical counts or.
The most scary thing you said was talking about safety and the complete failure of the state to take a role that is worth its term. In virtually every state I know of, well, light rail lines generally do not cross state lines. The federal government has no role. It's intrastate. In California, it's the Public Utilities Commission. In Texas, it's the Texas Railway Commission, which actually has more important duties. But in California, where there are 5 operating and another light rail line under construction, you have to have the entire system approved by the State Public Utilities Commission before you can start operations. If you have any brains, you have it approved before you start construction. Well, sometimes people don't. And I will tell you from long experience, and I'm speaking as the person who was in charge of safety for the first light rail line in LA, which I inherited after they built the damn thing. Wrong. The people who design and build these systems know nothing about operations and don't care. And there's nobody at the transit agency generally who has any experience. And these can be exceedingly dangerous because they don't know what they're doing. Now the strange thing is, in California, once you get that approval from the PUC, you're exempt. As long as you can show that you followed all the rules, you cannot be sued. Now, in Arizona, where apparently there are no rules, I'm not sure what the legal thing would be, but in virtually every state, if you're operating a rail system and you follow all the rules, if you've got your signs up for crossings and they're working correctly, you literally, it's almost impossible to get sued unless you're a passenger. If you're driving or walking or cycling or whatever and you're hit by a train, you have virtually no course of action at all unless they did something wrong.
Well, that's what I'm counting on for retirement, because the fact that in Arizona we have no rules, that the oversight people haven't established any rules and don't intend to establish any rules until after crashes, I think is a case of gross negligence that I think will prove very financially damaging to the rail operation. That, here's a cost in all the billions of dollars they have planned. How much do they have planned for legal judgments against them? Well, none. And as you can see, since they aren't doing things with any they had no safety oversight in the design, and they aren't going to have any in the operations until after the first crash, which you say, well, that's probably the first week of operation. But they're very vulnerable to that.
Well, in LA on the Blue Line, there were over 70 fatalities, and to the best of my knowledge, there was been a payment made on only one of those, and that was an extremely weird case.
Well, that's probably because you say, we followed the guidelines.
Exactly.
Well, we have no guidelines in Arizona. So tell all your lawyer friends, January of 2009 is the date they're supposed to operate, open operation. So somewhere soon after that, when they have the first crash, will be an opportunity to litigate.